Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. This is SIG CLI, August 15th, 2018. My name is Matej, and I'll be your host today. Our agenda is packed pretty much with the amount of topics that we have, so let's get started. But before we begin, quick announcements. There are two important dates coming up shortly. One is August 28th, which is Code Slush, which means everything that you want to have in Kubernetes 1.12 has to be labeled and marked and approved for 112 MySL by that date. And a week later, on September 4th, there is a code freeze, which means by that time, all the work has to be completed. So basically, the next meeting we'll be having will be already post-code slush. That's why I'm mentioning both of these dates. Okay, quick update from the test script. Looking at our testing playbook, the person that was looking after our test was Sean. Sean, can you give us a quick update? Were there any problems, issues with the merge queue and the SIG CLI related tests?
So it actually was surprisingly uneventful until last night at 8 p.m. One of the SKU tests started flaking dramatically. I'm still in the process of trying to run that one down. But if you look at all the other tests, they're green, and they've all been green the vast majority of the time for this. It felt like we've unlike previous iterations, this felt very smooth and not many events. I haven't updated the test coverage on the spreadsheet yet.
Can you also add the incident that you mentioned from yesterday to the incidents paragraph that we have in this doc? Awesome.
Yep. Yeah, it just happened just recently. If you look at the test grid, you'll see that one SKU test, GKE, it started at 8:20 p.m. last night, being temperamental with plenty of reds.
Okay, awesome. Thanks very much for the info. The next person taking over the test on call will be me. If you're willing to take the role, feel free to add yourself to this document. I've noticed that one is just added himself as the next person. If there's no space, feel free to add new rows to this document with dates every 2 weeks. In short, the role is to look after the queue and the test script and ensure that all the SIG CLI tests are green. If there are some problems, you either try to solve it or you ping persons that are responsible for the area and ensure that these are handled in a timely manner. So I encourage everyone who has not volunteered yet to do just that. Okay. With that, I think we can jump into our main topics. And the first one is the new plugin mechanism. And Juan will tell us a little bit about the CAP that was announced 2 weeks ago on KubeDev and the SIG CLI mailing lists. So let's give us, Juan, go ahead and give us a quick overview of the proposal, and then we can discuss this later on.
Sure. So the proposal basically highlights a get style plugin mechanism. This is merely an update to the existing plugin mechanism and not something we plan on making beta right away. So the main gist of this is basically addressing all of the limitations that the previous plugin mechanism had. More so the ability for a plugin to receive an untouched environment, parameters, flags, anything passed by the user. So that was the first and foremost priority when making this design. The other is to basically make it easy for users to install plugins. So it could be a deterrent for users if installing a plugin or even making a plugin is somewhat difficult. So by having something where a user could just take a file, make it executable, drop it in their path, and that's all they need, I'm hoping this will encourage users to use and to make plugins for anything they need. Aside from that, we have a few non-goals associated with this. So this is not meant to manage plugins in any way. There's a separate kit for that. This is also not meant to provide updates to plugins or anything of the sort. This is simply, as bare bones as it gets. We just want a stable foundation to stand plugins on top of, and basically accommodate any further features that need to be on top of it. Along with this proposal, we're basically including, a small way for users to detect any valid plugins in their path. So the old plugin subcommand for kube control has been repurposed for that matter for the time being. And yeah, hopefully the goals and the use case here are pretty self-explanatory and will convince you as to why we need something like this. I can take any questions if anybody has any questions at this time.
Juan, it's Sean. I noticed you had an implementation PR out as well. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so hopefully the implementation PR gives or sheds a bit more light as to the intended purpose behind the cat. There is a small walkthrough in the description of this PR, which I'm hoping users or viewers will try at their own leisure and pretty much experience for themselves what the new mechanism will be like. All of the old code paths have been removed for the old plugin mechanism with this PR.
Mm-hmm.
And also something of note that this PR brings is that plugins will no longer be namespaced to the kube control plugin subcommand, but rather any plugins you make will basically act as first-class citizens right underneath kube control.
I imagine that an example plugin is probably going to be, very popular once people start writing plugins to see, a concrete example of what the code would look like. Where to start. That type of stuff.
Definitely. So I was sort of wondering where the best location for this could be. If there's a particular place in the Kubernetes repo, where I could add that, I'd be happy to. If not, I was thinking of just adding example plugins as part of any documentation, that comes as part of this.
I don't remember where we keep the sample controller example, which is there for showing people how to write a sample controller. But I would imagine us having something similar called sample plugin, and that will happen right after we have the plugin mechanism, and secondly, in the CLI runtime library, which will provide the foundation for building kubectl-like commands. And with that, I'm hoping that the sample plugin will show people how to both implement the plugin and at the same time reuse the functionality that we also use within the kubectl itself. So yes, definitely that's a must, but definitely one that will happen afterwards.
I have a quick question, Maciej. Are we planning on pulling that CLI runtime library out into its own repo?
Yes, that's actually the second topic of the agenda.
Got it.
Let's close the plugins, and then we'll move on to the CLI runtime. Okay. Are there any other topics? with regards to the plugin mechanism? So given that there's no objections and we've been discussing this topic for a good couple months already, and the proposal was announced 2 weeks ago and is out there for quite a while, and I haven't seen any complaints or questions or any concerns with regards to the KEP, I'd like to approve this KEP right after the meeting and have it merged, and then we can focus on the actual implementation, unless somebody objects. Okay, hearing none, thanks. So we can focus on the CLI runtime, and that will be me. So like we said some time ago, writing plugins is one thing. What we would like to see is people reusing the functionality that we already have and providing plugin authors with library that will enable them to write kubectl-like behaving plugins or commands. And for that, within the 1.11 release, we spent a decent amount of time extracting the main functionalities into a package that is currently under package kubectl generic CLI options. This is to start with. There will be more things being extracted from the core kubectl into this library, but it will definitely be, it'll take us some time, so hopefully we'll be expanding this library. But what we would like to start with, and we're hoping to start with this within 1.12 still, is to extract the generic CLI options to start with. And hopefully that will be published similarly to how ClientGo, API Machinery, and other staging repos are currently done. So hopefully within the next 2 weeks, we'll be able to tackle this problem and have that library extracted. Once that happens, the sample plugin should come to fruition as well. Are there any questions, concerns for this one?
So not a concern, but I guess I'd like to just really quickly clarify that although we're providing plugin authors with this set of tools that we're also dogfooding in kubectl, we basically are not enforcing that plugin authors stick to Go. So the plugin mechanism will be language agnostic. All you need is an executable. I guess the best way to put it is we're swaying the decision of potential plugin authors, to write their plugins in Go, and if they do, then they'll get the same helpers and the same utilities and libraries that we use in kubectl for our own commands. And as a side benefit for us, that will pretty much ensure that any plugins that are created with this set of tools adhere to common CLI practices in kubectl, and that the plugins that come out of it are or feel native to the user.
I have one quick question, Maciej. Is the CLI runtime is going to be dependent upon ClientGo? So there'll be a client. So I know that in the CLI options, at least actually under the resources helpers was kind of where the client that would talk to API server.
Definitely there is a dependency against the Kube API. I don't remember whether we have any dependencies against ClientGo, but I'm not saying that we won't in the long term, because eventually we would like to have some kind of a functionality for accessing clients. I'm not 100% sure. That might change. So I'm not. That part is pretty much fluid. So definitely it might happen, but I'm not 100% sure. It will evolve over time, and as we as we speak and as we use it and as we get feedback from plugin authors, what type of functionality they are missing, and us writing plugins and seeing how this interacts in the kubectl itself, what type of functionalities we are repeating over and over again that might be just of use for other plugin authors, and we'll be extracting this functionality into that library, so that at the end of the day, users should not ever need to vendor kubectl when it eventually reaches its own repo, nor any part of Kubernetes for the basic functionality. I'm not talking about some advanced use cases where, I don't know, I can't imagine people doing some crazy stuff, but that's, I'm trying to not to think about those at this moment. Oh, and one important thing, maybe that wasn't obvious, the proposed name for the library, which will eventually be the repo under Kubernetes org, will be CLI runtime. And the reason for that is that we already have runtime for controllers, which is called controller runtime, and controller tools. So we decided that we'll just go with CLI runtime as the basic building blocks for any type of CLI command that wants to follow kubectl patterns. And I'm not saying that this will be only for kubectl plugins itself, but I can imagine other tools reusing this functionality for creating some higher level CLIs for interacting with Kubernetes API.
Yeah, currently there's several projects which are creating their own, or have already created their own CLI that could benefit from the CLI runtime library. Specifically, like Istio Cuddle. You know, Istio has its own CLI, and they've realized that they've kind of made a mistake in creating their own tool when they didn't really leverage a lot of kubectl. Anyway.
Yeah, I've noticed that Lucas linked this one to ADM, which means yes, there is a desire for this type of library for people to consume, to build their own tools.
Yeah,
sure.
but could I mean, as an author, really kind of playing devil's advocate here, but like as an author of a CLI that mimics kubectl in a way, EKS Cuddle, I'm not entirely sure what I could reuse, right, from kubectl at the moment. I just have very similar command structure, but I'm not entirely sure what would be so reusable from kubectl. Maybe a printers package. I'm not entirely sure about much else.
Could you mention that again? I'm sorry. I apologize. I was interested in hearing about this new CLI.
The question was, the question was what type of functionality are we hoping to provide with the generic CLI options or CLI runtime that other tools might want to reuse within their own code. So we initially started with printing. Since printing is basically reuse in every single command, we've had a bunch of helper methods so far in kubectl how to print resources, and then depending on the flags being passed over to the command, the output might change, whether you're getting a YAML version, JSON, or custom columns, human readable output, and all the others. With that, we provided a printers package which embed all this functionality and provide a unified way of printing objects across all of the kubectl commands. And I'm hoping that all the other tools or plugins will be able to reuse that same functionality for printing the objects. I think that printing is probably the most common functionality, either for dry run or for notifying user what type of action has been performed.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So that's what I was thinking, because I couldn't think of anything else really.
If I could add here, so aside from printing, you could call it a side effect of this repo would also be providing common config flag setup. So within this generic CLI options package at the moment, we also have all of the functionality that all of the kubectl command use. Basically, every single kubectl command uses this library to obtain REST client configuration, bind config flags, and anything else that's needed to basically parse and retrieve and make sense of a user's kubeconfig file. So should you use this, you could also take advantage of this and get a pretty generic way of talking to the API server.
We're also hoping that at some point in time we will be able to restructure the resource builder in such a way that it can live in that library as well. But that's not 100% sure, and we need to see how much of the functionality is possible to be extracted.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, just mostly curious at this point. But like other things, like let's say I'm working on some CLI and I don't want to inherit certain flags from kubectl, right? So I actually want to avoid using kubeconfig the way that kubectl uses it, and for me, kubeconfig means something else. So specifically for AKS-Ctl, we need to, before we even get to talk to the API, we need to go and talk to Amazon API and create a bunch of resources there and create a cluster, and then we write out kubeconfig, and actually like kubeconfig argument is the one to specify the path where to write kubeconfig to. So just an example, right? So I wouldn't want to have the same behavior that kubectl has around kubeconfig, where it tries to load it right away or something. Anything like that would be unuseful, I'd say.
Yeah. So pretty much when you choose to use this repository, the way you would use certain bits and pieces is by instantiating flag structs. So basically, for any bits and pieces you want to use, say printers, for example, you'd be instantiating what's called print flags, which is just struct. And then what that allows you to do is it allows you to bind all or certain flags and then retrieve a working printer. And then the configuration stuff works the exact same way. So everything follows the same pattern. For config flags, you would also have to consciously instantiate the config flags struct and bind all or selective flags from it, and then retrieve a working, REST client getter, we call it, from those config flags. So essentially, there's a pattern that you consciously follow to retrieve the bits and pieces you need, and then with whatever you don't need, you just don't instantiate.
Okay, that's nice. Definitely. Thank you.
Okay. I'm not seeing or hearing any other questions. So we can then jump to the next topic that Juan added to the agenda, which is about the watch and describe and server-side printing. Juan, the floor is yours.
Thanks. So yeah, there's a few items here as part of this topic. I'll go ahead and talk about watch first. So with regards to the changes that have occurred in kubectl get, we have basically enabled server-side printing by default as of kubectl 1.11. What this means is that as of 1.11, whenever users have performed the kubectl get command, they have been using a response, a tabular response, meant for humans that has been essentially formatted by the server. So just to give a quick recap, the main gist behind server-side printing is we don't want kubectl to have knowledge baked in of every single type that it supports or that the server supports, because this basically tends to break down when we talk to new servers. It tends to break down when we deal with custom resource definitions and custom resources, and it tends to be unmaintainable in the long term. So what server-side printing has done is it basically allows the server, with its knowledge of all the types it supports, to tell the client, here is what's worth printing to a human about this particular resource that you're asking about. So as part of that update, we have certain pieces that still need to be addressed. A few of those are watching resources with get, as well as describing resources. Sorting is also in there. And what specifically needs to be addressed about these is that currently we don't support server-side printing with those code paths. So when you do kubectl get watch on a resource, we actually default to the old printing way, which means we're still depending on the knowledge of all types in the client, and which means we will need to carry that until we find a way to no longer depend on it with watch. I'm putting together a prototype that will attempt to essentially rewire the watch logic to work with server-side printing. The main gist behind that is that the server, like the endpoint handler for watch, needs to be updated to support the header that the client sends, requesting, the new table response essentially. As far as describe goes, we have a few options here. The most straightforward way to handle describe is to just literally switch every single handler we have for describe to deal with external types. So currently describers live in our internal printing package, and they only take internal versions of resources. So a straightforward way for now, simple solution could just be to copy paste those and just have the new copies deal entirely with external objects and just switch to using those. A more long-term solution for describe ideally would be to have the server do the same thing as with get, and basically have the server dictate what the description of an object looks like. There's a few issues that we can immediately detect with this idea that need to be addressed, and those are mainly when you describe an object, such as a pod, for example. Part of the pod's description today includes events. For a namespace, they also include maybe events, but they also include basically limits and quotas. So how should those be addressed? Should the server present essentially a description of all this to the client? Should the server say, oh, I don't know if the user is allowed to view quotas, for example, so you'll just have to make that request again, asking for that particular resource, and I'll tell you yes or no, depending on whether the user can access it. So essentially, there's potential for leaking information the user can't see if the server presents all the information at once. And then if we try to essentially address that problem by just having the server include references to other resources that the client can request a second or third time, we risk overcomplicating the client-side mechanism for putting together a template from the server. So I think it's good to at least begin discussion on these things now, and then over time craft a long-term solution. Taking into account that if we do need to cut any and all kubectl dependencies on internal types, a quick solution would just be to duplicate for now and switch to external. So I guess if anybody has anything else to add or any questions, please feel free to add them at this time.
To add a little bit background to the topic, Juan and I discussed this describe approach which potentially could reuse the current implementation that we have. So a little bit of dive into technicalities. Every GET request that is requesting a server-side printing information receives a table, and the table contains the columns that are to be printed, and then the following rows contain the actual data to be printed as is without any further formatting. If any formatting is required, it should be done on the server. And aside from freeing kubectl from the knowledge of the internal types, this also allows us to have a unified way of printing resources across all the clients. Doesn't matter whether it's a kubectl or a different client written in a different programming language or in a different way. The consumer of the API can, by using the server-side printing, ensure that they are printing the resources in exactly the same way as the kubectl does.
Is this how we're going to address printing CRD resources?
This is how we currently do print CRD resources. So CRD authors, within the CRD definition, they embed the information which columns should be printed for the server-side printing, aside from the name, which is there by default. If you don't provide the columns descriptions and the data, then by default we always print name and creation timestamp. If you provide the additional columns, I can't remember the exact field name currently off the top of my head, but aside from name, we will print the additional columns. So if you have some myfunky field or something like that, you just need to map, give the name of the field that should be presented as the server-side printing, and the JSON path where which part of your CRD object this data should be coming from. And this is how we currently solve the printing of the CRDs, and it works very well. Unfortunately, like Juan said, there are these two problems that we just recently identified: the watch and the describe, which are currently preventing us from ensuring that the entire kubectl is free from internal dependencies of the Kubernetes. Are there any other questions? We're hoping to, the watch is something that we will try to tackle within 1.12, but I doubt we will be able to do anything about the describe. We might try to give it a try, but it won't be able to land in a reasonable shape for 1.12 code slush, I think. Okay, I'm not hearing any questions. So the next topic is actually connected with the server-side printing. I think that it should be this one, but it's a separate topic.
Maciej,
which is sorting. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was hoping to get just a couple of minutes to talk about the kubectl extraction, trying to get kubectl out of core.
Okay, let's do that. In that case, I think the these two topics are the most important, and we can always talk about sorting in the next meeting. Actually, I also wanted to touch base on the charter as well, to give a quick discussion, but we can do that right afterwards. Okay. So let's do the kubectl extraction first.
Yeah, so I don't have much to add. Actually, I'm trying to come up with a list of what I imagine all of the dependencies that we need to be snipped before, well, just for anybody who's not familiar with this effort, for quite a long time, we've been trying to uh, get our kubectl code base out of Kubernetes core into its own repo. There's various reasons for that, along the lines of velocity and et cetera. And so right now I've just recently started digging into trying to figure out just what is it that's keeping us from moving this from kubectl out of core. What dependencies are there? And once we pull it out of core, we can't vendor anything in from Kubernetes. So we'll have to, any of the places where we depend upon the core now, we need to move those to staging repos like Client Go or Kube API or the API machinery, which are already, they're essentially out of core. They're staged. And we would start off, I'm imagining, staging kubectl so that we could still take advantage of the testing infrastructure that Kubernetes core has until we basically are able to bootstrap our own, and until we have a good story for how we're going to connect this kubectl that's built outside of core into end-to-end tests. But aside from that, I haven't really, I haven't finished this list of what these dependencies are. It appears to be that a lot of these dependencies are due to our reliance on internal versions of resources. So, so if we're depending upon package/API and then a version of whatever the resource is under that particular path, then that's an internal version of the object, and we need to instead rely on what's under the staged repo of API, Kube API. And so, yeah, I don't have much to report just because I'm still in the process of trying to figure out where all these live and find the transitive dependencies of all of these. But that's an effort that's ongoing now. And if you have any, so since this has been going on so long, if you have any suggestions for me, I'm more than happy to to listen to those suggestions. Does anybody have any questions on that effort?
So to add a little bit more color to what Sean just said, all the work that we've been doing for the past couple of releases, which includes, you probably noticed that we are working hard on externalizing all of the kubectl commands, which basically means that every single kubectl command, if it's using internal client set, or basically the clients that are not of a particular version, but rather the internals, this type of a changes is what we are currently doing. So all of the commands has to, as Sean mentioned, work with the external version of the resources. That's one offender. And out of the two biggest offenders that are using the internals is actually the get command and the scribe command. The get command, one of the reasons that we went with the server-side printing is to get rid of the problem of kubectl having to know how the resources look like, etc., etc. And as a side effect, we got rid of handling with the internal resources. Of course, for backwards compatibility, we still provide a -- server print equals false, so that people who wants to reuse the old behavior. And additionally, for the use cases when you're doing get -- watch, we will fall back to the previous behavior, which is reusing the internal versions of the objects to print them. That's why we're also bringing the topic of describe, because describe currently relies on the internal version of the resources. And there are currently discussions whether we might be duplicating the code for describe so that it works with external versions, and the internals we will leave with the server to speed up the extraction that Sean mentioned a minute ago. But these are the biggest offenders currently, the internal client set, and everywhere if you see in kubectl in your and you have some time and you're willing to fix them, we are more than happy to see PRs that are actually transitioning from the internal client sets to the external. It's not super hard, and if you look through several past PRs against our kubectl commands, it should be pretty easy to follow the trend.
Yeah, so that was about all I had, just to let everybody know that's ongoing. And I'm attempting to document all of the places I believe need to be changed. I put a few PRs out to actually do it just so that I could see what it feels like in real life. But mostly I just want to document it so that we know exactly what needs to be done before we can finally get kubectl into a staging repo.
Okay, I'm not hearing questions. Since we have like 5 minutes left of the meeting, maybe we can move to stand-ups. Does anyone have any updates they want to share with the group?
I'll share one quick update, which is on the server-side apply. So I've left the working group on server-side apply, but that work is still ongoing. And I had claimed, I think in 2 previous meetings ago, that we were very close to an alpha, and that was way premature, to be honest. It's still not alpha, and it still won't be alpha probably for another 4 weeks or so. I think they're going to try to get alpha for 1.12, but I don't think anyone is very confident in that. They've been working a lot on dry run, which is much more complicated than was initially thought, because everything through all of the webhooks have to get this new flag. Everything through the emission chain has to get the new dry run flag. But they've been doing a lot of work on that. I'll keep everybody up to date when I think something more substantial happens. What do you think, Munchie? Did that sound right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, from our end, the plugins were discussed at the beginning of the meeting, so I don't think we need to update on this topic. On the other note, although that was also discussed, we're still progressing with the refactorings to the external client set with all of the kubectl commands as far as we can and as much as we can. Other than that, the current work is on improving the generic CLI options functionality, because over the past couple of weeks, Juan and I, we've been struggling with the current implementation. We've noticed several flaws, and we're trying to fix them and make them more easy to use for other plugin authors and basically kubectl alike authors. So hopefully when that is out, we will also start working on creating the staging repo for CLI runtime, which should happen in time for 112. Okay, I think that's all from us as well. You have anything else to add, Juan?
No, I think the only other outstanding topic was on sorting, but like you said, we can probably make some time in the next meeting and discuss that at length.
Yeah, I moved it as a first topic for the next one. I don't want to overhold people. It's we're like 2 minutes left, so still. Okay, does anyone else have any other topics, issues they want to bring up?
So we'll have a small discussion on the charter next time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's do the discussion on the charter as well on the next one. Hopefully by then we should be able to have the PR in a shape for merge as well. I've noticed that you had some questions. I went through the PR earlier today. Sorry for the delay. I totally run out of time in the past 2 weeks, and so hopefully we will be able to close that one in during the next meeting.
Yeah, just as a quick note on the charter, we rebased it on after the steering committee asked us to on basically a much smaller template that pushes off a lot of the stuff that we had initially addressed, so that they want to mostly work on the scope and the roles are basically all the same for every single SIG, except we have this extra role that we've defined of a test on call, test maintainer. And also I think we describe emeritus leads like Tony and Fabiano. And that, I don't think that was in the standard, the standard template for roles, but it ends up being that, this is much smaller and much more tractable. Although, like I said, they want us to focus on what is the scope of what we think we're in charge of, and what are the things we definitely are not in charge of, like API machinery. So I should probably add that link, that PR link into these notes. I'll do that right afterwards.
You don't have to. I already added as part of the stand-ups. I added the link and a short mention of the SIG CLI up. Okay, I think our time has passed. So thank you very much all for your time, and see you in 2 weeks. Bye.
See you then.
Bye.